conversation with a whole lot of truth. Remedy Revolution is here for you. Ooh. And now here's your host, Erin Paige.
All interviews presented on the Remedy Revolution podcast are designed to provide information and inspiration only. Guests of the podcast may present opinions and anecdotes which are solely their own. And as always, before beginning any treatment protocol, please consult with your preferred medical provider. Hey everyone, welcome to the Remedy Revolution. Today's guest is somebody who I'm very excited to introduce. She's new to me, but not new to this world. She runs a busy office called Victory Health in North Carolina. She's also author of Cardiology Essentials, which is a textbook. So, very, very intellectual woman we are talking to here. She's also the author of Holler for Your Health, as well as On Medicine and Miracles. She works with people who've been affected by chronic illness in general. And today we're going to talk a little bit about mold and how that plays a role in various chronic illnesses such as PANS and PANDAS. It is my pleasure to introduce Teresa Holler. Teresa, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Erin. It's great to be here.
So we haven't done a deep dive into mold. And I know that a lot of times, particularly in the special needs community, there is a lot of conversations that talk about mold and relapses and things like that in after mold exposure. And so what are you seeing along these lines? Are you seeing mold as a primary trigger, or is it often more of a secondary trigger or a relapsing trigger?
I think it's a primary trigger, a secondary trigger, and a relapsing trigger. It's all three. It's different for each patient. I will say that many people are afraid to look for mold because they've heard the horror stories of all that you may have to do to fix it. And I just want to encourage your listeners that sometimes it's simple. Sometimes, I had a patient with PANS who had a different trigger. I believe it was a mycoplasma initially. And then he had another flare after recovering, and it was due to a pediatrician giving him an antibiotics, and it was actually due to candida. And then we addressed that. And then he had another flare like a year later, and there was mold in his closet at his home. It was simple. There was a bathroom on the other side, a pipe burst. So looking for mold doesn't have to be scary. Depending on what type of mold it is, sometimes it's a simple fix, cleaning the vents, or it's one pipe. It's not always selling everything you own and moving out. And I think those horror stories have done a disservice to people wanting to even look. And I just want to encourage people to look, because if you find it, everything else you're doing works better and you save so much money in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point too, because so many of us in the world of chronic illness live in this space of avoidance, and it becomes obsessive, really, unfortunately, because, we're constantly talking about, okay, well, I have to buy this house because it, is the least likely to contain mold, or I have to buy, this car because it doesn't have as much, it's an older car. And so it's been off gas, or all of these things. So, or I can't eat this, or I can't eat that. All of these things we make our worlds very, very small. So I love that you mentioned that, because it's so true. I think ultimately we want to restore the system, right? We don't want to have to live a world of complete avoidance all the time.
Yeah, out of 1,000 patients with mold toxicity, I've only had one who was sensitive enough to have to sell everything she owns and start over. She had to do that twice, actually, and she's an RN. And then she was able to desensitize with low dose immunotherapy. And now that's going to be wonderful for her going forward. And then a second one who was in black mold or Stachybotrys, which is really extreme. And you have that when you do urine mycotoxin testing, because you'll see the trichothecenes in your urine. And that means black mold is likely what you're exposed to. People in those homes, they just don't get better until they get out. But that's usually in walls. So sometimes that's just a pipe behind a wall. It's the plaster or the drywall that where that likes to live. So it's not always a big deal, even when it's that. But I do know that I can recover people symptomatically while they're in mold from other molds, but just not the black mold. And so it can get better. It's just that you have to stay on so many supplements to stay better until you get, and then you can start weaning them down.
Yeah, so let's talk about maybe some of the signs and symptoms that one might notice if we want to kind of go down that mold rabbit hole. Obviously, there are so many avenues we could look to. So, what would be some of the signs that would lead you down that path?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's a major trigger of PANS and PANDAS, or PANS, because PANDAS is after strep. So the symptoms are the same. It's going to be a flare. And the flare, whenever patients call me and say, oh, my child's having a flare again, I just start asking questions. Okay, what's new? What happened around the time of that flare? And that's your best ticket to deciding, oh, strep was going around the classroom. Let's look at that. Or someone gave him an antibiotic. Let's look at candida. Or, it's only when we went away on vacation, we did well, we came back. And then you think mold or something in the home. And so symptomatically, it's going to look the same. But in general, mold is a very strong trigger of mast cell activation. So you're really going to see a lot of things like POTS, right? That autonomic dysfunction, bloating in the abdomen that doesn't get better with the standard gut treatments, the fingers going numb. You can actually take your fingernail and just draw something on your child's back, like a little line. And then if it gets really red, that's actually a marker for that. So instead of doing lab testing like a C4A, you can just run your fingernail on the back. And then if it gets red and blows up, then this is a mast cell activation. So those symptoms are really clear. As far as in the brain, it's going to be more things like word finding issues, using the wrong word. You mean to say this, but this other word comes out of your mouth, things like that, more executive dysfunction, and absolutely a fear response, your fight or flight, things like that.
Mm-hmm. So when looking for mold, are you more of a proponent of testing, say, the house or testing the patient? Because I know this is a big topic of conversation for a lot of people.
It depends on the history. It's different for everyone. So if someone comes in not for mold, like they come in and they have Lyme, or they come in and they have something else and it's obvious and I want to treat that, sometimes to save money, I will just test the home because it's cheaper than testing the body, and just make sure they're in a safe place so that I'm not wasting money on treatment. I'm very budget conscious with my clientele. And so I'm always thinking of what's the most cost-effective way to help this person. And if I'm going to put them on 6 to 12 months of supplements, that adds up over 6 to 12 months, then I want to make sure that at the end of 6 to 12 months, they're done. And the only way to know that is to make sure that their home is not moldy, because otherwise they'll feel better and they'll think, okay, I'm counting down the months. And then they get there, you pull them off, and then they get sick again and you have to start all over. And so it's cheaper to test the house in that type of patient. And the cheapest way to test a home is to do a Hertz Me Too, which is about $130 if you're doing a whole home, just to make sure it's safe. But if you're looking for where it is in a home, it's cheaper to do an immunolytics because it's about $30 a plate. And other tests are just not good enough. You really need to pick one of those two. And the immunolytics are perfect for dorm rooms. So your kids get better, they go off to college, they flare. You can do a $30 immunolytics plate and find it if it's mold. Or if you just want to do the child's bedroom or something, then that's the cheapest way to go about it. As far as when to just check the body, it really depends on symptoms. If I'm like, if I really think so myco testing, if I don't know if mold is in the body, like they got sick, they moved, and everyone else in the house was sick in the first house, but they're all better in the second house, but this child's not. That's when you think, well, this house is probably not the source. So maybe it's more cost effective to see if maybe he just can't get the mycotoxins out. And then I'll do that test on that child. So it's different for everyone. And then the organic acid testing. So you're looking at about $300 for urine mycotoxin testing, $300 for organic acid testing, approximately. Organic acid testing is really good for patients who have fatigue, have muscle weakness, have just a plethora of symptoms, because you're going to find if mold's growing in them, because then you need antifungals, because you're basically a factory of making mycotoxins. So what's the point of looking at the mycotoxins? We got to kill what's making them in you. And then, in general, it's nice to see which mycotoxin to know which binders to use, but I use a combination binder anyway. So to save money, save that $300, if I know that it's mold, then the oat, the organic acid testing, I call it an oat, will say, oh, it's living in you. We know you've been exposed. So why spend money on the mycotoxin? Now, granted, I love data for patients who can afford it. You should do it because it's really nice to be sure. But if you can't afford it, you can go on a binder that's tolerable. There's many choices, broad spectrum binding, and then just do an antifungal if it's on the oat. But the oat's also going to give you an overview of your microbiome in general. Like, is it a Clostridia issue? Is it a mitochondrial issue? Is your B12 not activating? Because the methylmalonic acid will be high on that marker. Your mitochondria are checked. The neurotransmitters are checked. There's detoxification markers that are checked. Is your folate activating? Is your riboflavin there? So I really think that for the best bang for the buck is that organic acid testing. And it's a urine test, as is the mycotoxin. So for children, that's really a plus.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially so many parents come to me and their kids are just deathly afraid of, any kind of medical intervention. So the idea of getting a blood draw from that child is,
Sure.
yeah, it's very, very challenging.
I try to limit that. And there is a test. We have some children who are on the autism spectrum as well as PAN. So there's a difference in who can do what. But for children who can do a visual contrast sensitivity test, it's either free or very cheap online. And that's a good way to know that you have biotoxin illness. It doesn't tell you what the biotoxin is. So it's not going to say it's mold versus an endotoxin from Lyme or whatnot, but you can tell that the brain's toxic from that test. And you can get that at survivingmold.com. I don't follow all of the protocols on that website, but I do love that test.
So I love that you said that you're budget conscious, because I think that's such a huge issue. I think that's part of the reason why people choose not to even look at the mold conversation, because they're fearful of the cost involved. It's one of the reasons I've always been a huge proponent of homeopathy, because homeopathic remedies are very inexpensive. And so I think that's hugely important to be conscious that, most of these parents are paying out of pocket. Most of the time, insurance does not cover these things. So I want to make parents aware that, when you go to a practitioner who's trying to assist you in these environmental illnesses, oftentimes, unfortunately, we're not contracted by insurance. And, so it is going to be something out of pocket. But I do think it's important that, especially as practitioners, that we're sensitive to that fact and understand that, our mutual friend Sandra actually always says, you shouldn't have to be wealthy to be healthy.
Well, I interrupt you and talk to you about what Sandra did. That's so amazing.
Absolutely. So let me just back up and let everybody know listening that Sandra Trewick is, she owns the Oklahoma Donkey Dairy, and she is a mutual friend of Teresa and I, and that's how we were introduced. Sandra is an amazing woman. So go ahead.
So Sandra started a nonprofit, and it's small. There's not a lot of funds there yet, where she's helping kids who have PANS to get medical help. And so she and I connected with a nursing group called Remnant Nursing. And you can apply for a scholarship from Sandra for $500. And Remnant Nursing is now going to give you 3 visits with the nurse practitioners for that funding. So it's covered, where they can undergo testing. Now, again, the testing and supplementation is not covered, but again, we're doing it very budget conscious. And I've been training this practitioner with the budget protocols of how to help. And so for someone who can't get in and get medical attention, Sandra has this wonderful plan. So you can reach out to her at Hee Haw Health, I believe it is. H-E-E.
Yeah, Hee Haw for Health. Yeah. Yeah.
For help.
Yeah.
or you can find Remnant Nursing and find your way in to get help if you haven't found a practitioner that is helping you. And if you have, stick with it, because there's many ways to do things, but you have to do it. And so, you don't really want to shop around. You want to really do what you're told to do if you found someone that knows how to do it. Stick with it, give it a chance to work. And then if you've given it enough time and it hasn't worked, that's when you want to move on. But don't move on in the middle, because I know from experience that it's not just the children who are sick. I mean, these moms are run ragged by this illness, and there's no way they're not in fight or flight too. There's no way their amygdala is not responding too. And so it's really hard, because when you get into that mode, it's almost like you can't settle, and you're constantly looking and worrying and controlling, because that's what you do in that setting. And so it's nice to just stick with what's working and give it a chance to work.
Yeah, it creates a sense of hypervigilance. And so if there is a moment where, say my child has been doing really well, and I am by no means perfect when it comes to this. I'm certainly fallen victim to this trap myself. But you get to a point where things are going okay, and then they might have an off day or something like that. And then you immediately panic and you start pulling out all of the old protocols, or you start to get into this massive panic mode where you feel like you have to do something immediately. And I see that with a lot of my own patients too, and I always encourage them, if you're going to come see me, the investment really, it needs to happen on the second and third visit. And it's the first visit where I'm, learning a little bit about you and can try to understand what's going on. But, we really make a lot more progress and when we get to the second and third visit, because that way we know how the kid's responding and all of these things. So I presume there's a lot of that going on in your field as well.
And not everything is a flare. I had a patient this week who was going to withdraw her son from college next semester because his symptoms, there were symptoms there, but the symptoms were in a flare. It was a very mild, easy tweak of supplementation. And so, if you're running around and thinking you're flaring and then going to old protocols, sometimes it's just going to send you the wrong way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, speaking of protocols, when it comes to mold, I know a lot of times people will have to wait to get in to see a practitioner if they suspect mold, if they've gotten testing and they realize that there's mold. Is there something they can do to mitigate some of the effects of that exposure?
Yeah. So actually, I don't use Facebook much, but I have pinned to my Facebook page. We had a major hurricane come through my area. So I pinned how to take care of your home on there at the top of my Facebook page, which is Victory Health Consultants. So how to handle the home is there, how to remediate. And then from there, you want to settle the immune response. You're going to be in immune activation. And so you have to settle that. Those things, you can settle the immune response with ibuprofen or naproxen. Always use brand names. You don't want to be using generics whenever possible. So Aleve, Advil, Motrin. I really like Aleve. You don't want to use them long term because they do damage the electron transfer chain in the mitochondria. So this is just a short term, put it in, put it out. And then I really love curcumin, fish oil, and SPMs are amazing for rescue. They're expensive. And if you have an underlying cause that's not yet addressed, the SPMs are a good way to find that out. Because if you take 2 twice a day, you should settle. And if you settle for a couple of days and then symptoms come back, then there's a root cause that's still not addressed, because otherwise you wouldn't have it come back again. But your immune system is going to find a way to re-inflame because it's trying to help you if there's still something going on. And so I really love that about SPMs. They're potent and quick. For kids, I have these here because I put them in my water every day, but Avia is amazing from Nutrimetics. It's liquid curcumin. So you can just put a few dropperfuls in their water to sip over the day. And I usually combine it with berber panella to cleanse the lymphatics. It's also a liver kidney detox, and it's good for the microbiome. So I love these things. They're not going to pull you out of a flare by themselves, but they're really good for helping the immune system overall. So you want to do that. You want to get that done. You want to take something for the mast cells. You want to calm the mast cells. So quercetin, luteolin. You can even use over-the-counter H1 and H2 blockers. What that means would be like Pepcid AC is an H2 blocker. An H1 blocker would be things like Zyrtec, things like that. There's prescription versions of those as well. I prefer the supplements, the quercetin and luteolin. So calming the immune response, calming the mast cells. That's the initial step. And then you want to kill the fungus inside your body in case it's in there. And usually if you've been in mold, even if mold didn't get in you, your candida is going to go up because it's going to just thrive in that environment. So Kumanda is another tincture. So I love the tinctures because they all go in the same cup. It's so easy. And you just do it twice a day. And then Kumanda will kill the mold. It also works on Lyme and viruses and bacteria and parasites. It's also anti-inflammatory. Kumanda was tested against Feldene. Feldene was a prescription anti-inflammatory that was taken off the market because it was so toxic, but also extremely potent. And Kumanda is 99% as effective as an anti-inflammatory. And so you're going to get anti-inflammatory benefits. You're going to be able to kill the yeast, but you want to start at 1 drop twice a day. It's potent. And then you work up a drop a day. For children, 6 to 12, you want to get up to about 15 drops twice a day. If they're little, like 2 to 6, you want to half that. So maybe 7.5, maybe 10 if they're larger kids, drops twice a day. And that's going to kill yeast and mold and mycoplasmas and things like that in the body. So sometimes it'll take a while to get up to that top dose. You don't want to just plow up. You want to go up as tolerated. And use it with the Berber Panella and Avia. And then you want to use some kind of sinus spray. And there's many of them on the market that kill mold and fungus. There's so many options. There's neti pots. There's that you could add a drop of iodine or a little hydrogen peroxide, or you can buy a pre-made product. There's just a lot of choices out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I've been hearing a lot about lately, just a little bit off topic, but it is the xylitol nasal sprays for clearing out residual COVID spike protein, which has been fairly effective. I don't know if you've heard anything about that, but I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, xylitol is another option. For mold, though, I really like Citra drops. It was invented by or made by an ear, nose, and throat doctor. It's actually homeopathic in Atlanta, and you can order it on sinusitiswellness.com. And that's my favorite for mold specifically. But xylitol is another option, as are the things I mentioned before. And also, you want to be on a binder. You want to get the mycotoxins mobilized. And I really like Binder Plus by Nutrimedix. It's my new favorite because it's got a combination of different binders that bind the different mycotoxins as well as heavy metals and other things. In children, you have to be really cognizant of not over binding because they're developing and we don't want to pull out all their minerals and healthy fats and things. So, the full dose would be 2 capsules twice a day in adults. So in a child, you can still use that dose if they're an older child, but for younger children, maybe once a day would be more convenient, or half the dose. And you can open a capsule and sprinkle it in food. You can use a 16th of a dose and start mobilizing. And what I like about it is it has aloe and fulvic minerals in it. So it's very soothing. And it has activated charcoal, which is potent, but because it's in a combination, it's not so stripping like taking activated charcoal by itself. And so I really like that about it. And because it's broad spectrum, if you haven't been able to afford the testing, you're still going to pull everything out. So I really like that about it. And those are things you can do, conveniently and fairly cost effectively. Those few products, I would add Cemento. All of these are by Nutrimedix, so it makes it easy right from them, all of it. But the reason I like that is it's also an immune modulator. So for PANDAS patients, actually a study was released this past July showing that in comparison to naproxen, so naproxen, Aleve, right? Naproxen could be the prescription version of that. This was almost as effective in preventing an inflammatory response when it was on board before a trigger. So for prophylaxis of a flare, Cemento is really good. It's almost as good as, not almost, like 75% versus 90-something%, but without the side effects of being on long-term Aleve. You can't do that. So if they have that Cemento on board, it's antimicrobial. It works on Lyme and mycoplasma and viruses and on. And it's anti-inflammatory and immune modulating. So I don't need so many other things if I just use that. So if I were to say the full protocol, it would be Cemento and Kumanda together to kill the mold and to keep that immune response where it needs to be, a binder, and then maybe the Berber Panella with Avia, and maybe some quercetin. That's initially. And then you can just taper off the things you don't need when you get better.
Right. I love that you have such a conservative approach. I think ultimately, being on the other side of this conversation for a very long time, I'm very familiar with these, very intense protocols. And, sometimes they are prescribed as a one size fits all based on, the trigger. Sometimes, in fact, I refer to some of these protocols as killing protocols because it's essentially like antibiotics prophylactically plus, antifungals plus all of these things simultaneously. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing a whole lot of movement when we do those kinds of things. In fact, a lot of times it's, 2 steps forward, 3 steps backward, that kind of thing, instead of, getting people to a more gradual state of healing. So maybe you could speak a little bit to that, because I know I've heard another interview of yours where you did talk about treating much more conservatively.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. I had a patient, actually my very first PANDAS patient ever. This was maybe 12 years ago. I had no idea what I was doing, and I knew this child had it. She came in and I said to her, it's funny because she reminded me what I said to her. When she came in, I said, I know what this is. This is PANDAS. I'll test to be sure I'm right. I said, but I don't know how to treat it. I'll send you several states away to someone who can treat this, but I'll get the labs and someone else will have to do it. Well, she went home with her husband and they prayed, and they came back the next time and said, we really believe you're supposed to treat this. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I followed the standard PANDAS PPN network, right? It's a physician network that teaches you how to help. And I followed their protocol for this little girl because I had no idea what I was doing. So I had ordered that really expensive molecular test. I didn't know how to know I was right other than to do that. I don't do that anymore unless someone wants it because it's $900. It's a fabulous test if you can afford it. Do it if you can afford it, but it's expensive. But they called me after hours and said it was the worst levels they'd ever seen. So I got indoctrinated with the worst patient, right? And so I put her on a short course of steroids as well as azithromycin and a few, supplements, because I was doing what it said to do. And what happened is she got hallucinations from the steroid. That's a common side effect, and rage. It caused rage. And then she got candida from the antibiotic. So the very next time she came in a week or two later, I was weaning her off the meds onto supplements. And I got her better on the supplements I just mentioned. They might be slightly different. And she took more than I mentioned. Also fish oil, also I think IgG powder, whatever, a few other things. Because I was really sick. And I had already messed her up. So now I needed like nystatin. I'd already messed her up with the drugs. So we got her out of the flare. And then she flared again fairly quickly, maybe within a few months. I can't remember off the cuff. But her mom begged for azithromycin. And we were using ibuprofen rescue at that point in time, or at least those two. And I said to her, I'm going to write you a prescription for the antibiotic, but I don't want you to use it. I just want you to feel comfortable that you have it, not be scared. You have it if you need it. I said, but let's try the herbal antimicrobials. Give it as long as you're comfortable giving it. If you're like miserable and you want to take this antibiotic today, it's yours. And she didn't need it. And we went on, it's been over 10 years now. This child is completely recovered. Occasionally she goes back on the cemento cumanda because she'll have a flare if she's exposed to strep, or if she eats a ton of gluten. She's actually celiac. So sometimes she cheats. She's a teenager and she'll really decompensate from gluten, obviously. But other than that, she's on several supplements long-term, but not many. And so that was my first example of trying to do it the right way. I had no idea what I was doing, and the right way was the wrong way for this child. So then I learned how to do it with herbs and never went back to the prescriptions. I might have done one other steroid taper. I do azithromycin Z-Pack, just 5 days. I don't do the month. I don't need to with the herbs, but sometimes I like that crutch of throwing it on just for 5 days. And it's cheap. It's $7 if you have a copay, and then following with the herbs. I do that sometimes. But other than that, I don't use prescriptions. I do use ibuprofen or naproxen short-term initially because they come in jumping out of moving cars. I mean, they come in life-threatening. And so I use that.
We had that too. So yeah, I'm familiar with that.
It's fast. It's going to fix it. And then after that, I can use curcumin. I can use fish oil. I can use SPMs to settle them without having to use that.
Yeah, you said something really interesting because, I know a lot of conventional treatments and even naturopaths and various other practitioners are utilizing low dose naltrexone. And my son at 1 milligram had massive hallucinations. And when I tell providers that, they often don't believe me. But I mean, it is one of the noted side effects of naltrexone. And so, and then I recently tried it myself. I have autoimmune condition as well. And I came up ANA positive recently. And ultimately, I did not feel, I started getting visual disturbances with it. And so I decided to wean myself off. But interestingly enough, his dose was only at 1 milligram. And I'm seeing a lot of practitioners that are starting these kids at like 3, 4, 5 milligrams, which to me seems like a lot. I don't know. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So first of all, low dose naltrexone is still a drug, right? I use it limitedly. And the thing about LDN is it can take the place of IVIG. It does the same thing. It's going to block that toll-like receptor 4 that causes the glial cell inflammation in the brain. So it can be very powerful when IgG is needed. But in the course of my, 12 years of treating this disease, I've only had to refer, I don't do IVIG. I've only had to refer 2 patients for IVIG and 1 for plasmapheresis because I really thought they would die immediately. Like I didn't have time to treat them. They had to go immediately.
Sure.
And it was life and death with those 3, and one worse than the others, obviously. Aside from that, the treatments that I'm using are not requiring IVIG. But if it were to be to the point where nothing was working, and I thought, well, now we need to use IVIG, low-dose naltrexone can take the place of IVIG. That's when I would prescribe it. And that's the only time I would prescribe it because it's still a drug and I just haven't needed it. And what's interesting is when I go to speak at medical conferences and I talk to a lot of practitioners who treat PANS, and thank God for every one of them.
Absolutely.
Every one of them, because they put their neck on the chopping block to treat your children. And thank God for every one of them, whether they're doing it right or wrong, they are good people. But I will tell you this, they say that the flares get worse each time. And I looked at them in awe. I was like, I have never seen a flare get worse in my life. Every single patient is absolutely the absolute worst I'm ever going to see them when they walk in the door. And after that first flare is down, the flares are not nearly as bad or as often. Like they just go down from there. And I think the difference is when you use herbals and supplements, they're going to have side benefits and side effects. You're moving everything in the right direction. And I just don't need to clobber them with things like LDN or IVIG.
Mm-hmm. Out of curiosity on that note, do you think that utilizing LDN as a precursor, if somebody wanted to try IVIG in seeing whether or not the patient responded well to LDN, would that be something that they might want to try prior to going into IVIG? Because I know I've seen many patients who've done really well with IVIG, but I've seen the opposite as well. So I'm just curious about that.
I mean, IVIG is a blood product. You really have to use it as a last course. And many patients do get worse instead of better. And you have to dose it right. You have to know how many to give. It's an art. And that's why I don't do it myself. But LDN does the same thing. So rather than saying do it as a test to see if you need IVG, no, do it. If it works, stay on it. You don't need IVIG. And if it doesn't work, then likely the IVIG wouldn't have worked either.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said that, IVIG is a blood product. To me, when I first learned of my son's diagnosis, this was over 10 years ago. And so the conventional wisdom at that time, obviously they didn't know a whole lot, but was antibiotics prophylactically till the age of 18 or 21, IVIG, potentially plasmapheresis, and sometimes a few random supplements and things like that. But what was really interesting to me is I was so, even 10 plus years ago, so leery of utilizing IVIG because I didn't know where that blood was coming from. Yes, they test it for some things, but they don't test it for everything. It's not, it's not gone through these rigorous, things for various, small infectious diseases that many of our kids actually have. And so it was a very scary proposition to me anyway. Like, okay, well, let's go ahead and try IVIG, which is why I never went down that path. So I appreciate you saying that very much.
Yeah, so a few comments on that. Number one, it's a pooled blood product, so it's a lot of donors. So I'm really risky business. I will say that, I really take seriously first do no harm. And so that is why I'm not a big proponent of it. But I will say a lot of people have recovered their children with it. And so it's not something to throw out. It's something to have great pause about. And the last thing I want to say is that the doctors who have used these protocols 10 years ago, thank God for them. And because these protocols do help some children and nothing help those children. Nobody had anything to help those children. And so I am thankful for every pioneer who, started playing around with what can we do? What can we do? And started finding things. But as we've moved forward, over the decade, we have tools that are simpler and, in my opinion, safer, and they are effective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important. Okay, so I'd love to just kind of ask you when a patient first comes to your doorstep, let's say suspected PANS, maybe PANDAS, maybe they have also an autism diagnosis or, some developmental concerns, things like that. What is usually the first rescue that you might reach for? In particular, I'm talking about kids that have like incredible anxiety, kids that have anger and aggression to the point of, beating up little siblings or, those kinds of things where it becomes really quite a dangerous proposition not to do anything.
Okay, so there's two totally different scenarios here. There's one that's like anxiety, panic attack. Hold off, because the anger and rage is a totally different protocol.
Right.
If they're anger and rage, the same goes for children who can't sit still in my office. They're just hyperconnected. They're moving around, they're touching them, they're interrupting, they're just driving you crazy. Lithium orotate will work within a day. Lithium orotate is a mineral, not lithium, the drug. It's a mineral. It's supposed to be in the drinking water. It comes in 5 milligram capsules, and they can take 1 or 2 twice a day.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do it a third time a day if it's working. That will settle them within 24 to 48 hours. You'll have an immediate reduction in that hyperkinetic state where they're angry and they're agitated and they can't sit still. And that's going to help a lot with those kids. And so I always tell my moms who come in, you have to differentiate symptoms so you know what's working. There's the OCD. There's the typical PANS basal ganglia inflammation symptoms. And then there's this jacked up, hyper crazy state. That's the best way to explain it, right? And they have different treatments. So if one's going down and the other one's getting worse, they think the kid's not getting better. You have to think, wait a minute, let's separate out the symptoms. This working, this is what we need to fix. So for instance, in the patient that I used the steroid, this got worse because of the steroid side effect, but this was immediately better. And I was like, not actually worse. This is worse. And this was a mistake. We'll fix that. Okay. So lithium orotate for sure. L-theanine or GABA can be helpful. Magnesium is amazing. Those kinds of things. And then for anxiety, the Avia, Nancy O'Hara is a PANS specialist, and she taught me this at iLad. She spoke, and I never used it, even though I do a lot with nutrimentics, as you can see, because I'm really picky about my brands of things. And I just didn't know that this was a powerful curcumin, so I'd never tried it. And she said she uses it specifically for her PANS kids who have anxiety and panic, and it works within an hour. She gives them a dropper every 10 minutes. And within an hour, she says they settle nicely. Mm-hmm. So I just started using this in my practice, and I find that I'm taking it now. I really like it. Mm-hmm. So that can be calming. And then if they're really having rage attacks, you have to think about Bartonella. Don't even wait on lab testing. Mm-hmm. Don't even wait on lab testing. Get them on Hatunia. Also, Nutritics takes Hatunia. Hatunia only will work 50% of the time. Any brand of Hatunia, right? That's what it does. So you add another herb to it eventually to increase the success rate. But start with Hatunia, because Hatunia also modulates the immune system and is an anti-inflammatory. And you can dose it drop by drop. And when you get it to the top dose, then you can say, do we have Bartonella? Did the lab tests come back? And do we need to add a second herb to increase efficacy? And different herbs. I like the Kumanda for that, which we already mentioned, or I like cryptolepsis or things like that. You can add to it, but that works really nicely. So just assume there's Bartonella. Just assume, because the lab tests are terrible. You may miss it, and you want to cover for it in case it's there. That's a horrifying disease, Bartonella. It's horrifying. The rages are horrifying, and you can take care of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I unfortunately have a lot of personal experience with that, but yeah, I think that's, such an important point too. I'd like to speak to something that you mentioned. I've always said, I feel as though PANDAS in general should have 2 different subsets, one for the OCD and anxiety and one for the anger aggression, because they're very different presentations and often very different triggers. What are you seeing? Obviously, you just spoke to the Bartonella, and from my experience, Bartonella is almost always the angry aggressive type. But what do you see as infectious triggers or mold or, even brain injury or trauma triggers? And how do those impact the way that the symptoms present in that particular patient?
So I most commonly see mycoplasma in my PANS population here where I am. And mycoplasma has a very unique presentation that I've noticed, in that these kids have very dark thoughts, and it comes in first person. So they think they're thinking them. So when I have a child sitting across from me, a 4-year-old, let's say, I interview the parents with the child outside the room to talk about all of the awful stuff because I don't want them to even hear them being talked about that way. I bring them in for a physical exam, and at the end, when I've gotten a report with them, they sit with their mom across from me, and I say to them, do you have really, really bad thoughts that just make you so sad or upset that you hate having? And they'll start to cry, and they have never even told their mom, and they just start to cry, and they're so ashamed. And they're like, they're having really disgusting, perverted, sexually perverted thoughts that there's no way they knew about this content. They're having thoughts of harming others. I had some really sweet girl tell me that she wanted to steal things or report her father for things he didn't do, like horrific stuff, and just crying about it. And I was like, well, what I tell them is that if you're having a thought that you don't like that you're having, it's not your thought. You don't like, why would you have it? I said, something is getting in your head and it's speaking in your voice. And then they light up. They're like, you mean I'm not this evil person? No, something in you is giving you an evil voice. And I said, we're going to go ahead and get that thing out of you. And then we treat them for mycoplasma every time. It's mycoplasma. But if you don't ask these kids, and these are the things you don't want to put in the chart, these are the things that get kids taken away. You don't want to tell their moms, don't tell other people. Let's just fix it. Let's just get it out. And so you want to treat for mycoplasma when that happens. And I love the Cemento plus Kumanda for mycoplasma. Remember, you have to drop by drop dose because you don't want to worsen anything in a major way. It needs to be very slow. And then you get to that top dose. Again, for kids 6 to 12, it would be about 15 to 20 drops twice a day at your top dose of those killing herbs. At kids 2 to 6, 7.5 to 10 drops twice a day of those killing herbs like Cemento or Kumanda.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that too. I personally have always been one to want to push through things, and I have learned the hard way that really is ineffective for both my own health as well as my son's. Gotten into trouble on more than one occasion for both of us in trying to do that. So maybe maybe I need some help. I don't know.
Let me point out something to help people see this the right way, because I have tons of patients who do that. I myself do that. But the issue is that when I say you have to get to 15 to 20 drops, people in their mind are thinking that's the dose that treats, and I want my kid treated. Let's get there. But that's not what I'm saying.
Right.
If you're feeling a little worsening at 3 drops, that 3 drops is actually a dose that's working. You're treating there. It's just cheaper now. The bottle's going to last longer. That's good. You don't want to push past that. And then if it stops treating, there's no more die off. It's not doing anything. That's when you go up. And the only reason we have a top dose is we want to make sure there's nothing else to hit. So a lot of my patients will hit at, say, 6 drops, and that's torture. It takes them a month or more to get up to the next dose. But once they get to, say, 8, it's like 9, 10, every day they're up and then they're done. And the only reason I do that is to be sure as you're going to that top dose, are you going to hit again? Is there more to kill? So there's no goal to get to anything fast. The goal is to get to a dose that's working and then stay there. And if you push too fast, a Herxheimer reaction, a lot of people have a misguided thought of what that is. Herxheimer reactions resolve within 3 days. If you have symptoms a week later that you've gone up on your drops or whatever you're taking to kill things, and you feel like you're having a die-off reaction, and a week later you're not better, that's not a die-off reaction. You've bumped yourself into secondary porphyria. And I mentioned that on the Jill Carnahan show. You just listened to that. And that's really bad, because what that is the most extreme form of oxidative stress there is. And now you've bumped yourself back weeks or months, to catch back up on treatment. So if you do that, you need to drop your dosage back a little more rather than just holding the line. Drop back a little. And the treatment is sugar. The sugar will bind the porphyrins, and you can do that with honey. You can do that with white rice that breaks down into sugar. You can do that with, many different things. Ginger candy works really well. And porphyria causes extreme anxiety, nausea, cyclical vomiting, things like that. So you don't want to do that. So really, truly go slow. Charcoal will also rescue you from porphyria, and you need to take antioxidants, vitamin C, glutathione, if you tolerate it, to pull out of that. And then you want to go slower because you don't want to set yourself back like that.
Man, I have like a million more questions, but we are reaching the end of our time. So maybe we can do this again sometime. I would really love to have you back on. All right. So we are reaching that portion in our show where I ask 8 rapid fire questions of our guest just to learn a little bit more about who they are and what makes them tick and why they do what they do. So, Teresa, are you ready?
Okay. It's like Family Feud. Okay. I've gotta have a lot of grace for the answers because in Family Feud, you know the dumb answers people say when they're like, okay, go ahead.
But those make the best videos, right?
Yes.
All right. If you could choose only one natural remedy for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Magnesium.
Awesome. I love that answer.
Thank you. So that's for everybody else around me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Tell us something that most people don't know about you.
I like to surf.
Awesome. I'm a native Californian, so I can appreciate it.
I love powder puff football, but I'm getting a little too old to play it.
That's awesome. If I were to compile a playlist of happy music, what song would you suggest be added?
It's Always Been You by Phil Wickham.
Interesting. I don't know that song. I'll have to look it up.
Inspirational song.
Awesome. Very cool. What is your favorite guilty pleasure?
Coffee. Coffee, 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 coffee.
Yep, you and me both. It's a ritual. It is. I just had another interview where they said coffee and cigars, and I said, but coffee is like that ritual. It's like, I don't know, it's more than just the coffee.
Coffee raises the BDNF more than any substance. I actually went to a lecture by Dr. Perlmutter, and they had a graph, and they had like curcumin and all these amazing things that raise your BDNF, which is the miracle grow for your brain. But coffee went off 3 pages with the page going long ways, and the others were like on the bar graph on that one page. Nothing grows the brain more than coffee other than exercise.
I love justification for my guilty pleasures. This is good.
Yeah.
All right. What is the most influential book you've ever read?
Holy Bible, hands down.
Awesome. You're not the first person to say that. So
yeah, I read a little every day. It's so inspiring and encouraging. And if you've never read it, don't start in the Old Testament, because I did. And I started like freaking out, and people were like, no. In the new. Yeah.
Absolutely. What does the word revolution mean to you?
Taking something bad and turning it into something good.
What does the word remedy mean to you?
Something that you take to take something bad and turn it into something good.
Awesome. And if you could impart one piece of wisdom onto our listeners, what would that be?
That's simple. There's always hope. Always.
Absolutely.
Nothing is impossible.
Well, Teresa, it has been such a pleasure chatting with you. I feel like we're old friends already. So for anybody interested in learning more and finding some more resources, you can visit teresaholler.com. I thank you so much for listening. Make sure to go check out our Instagram at Remedy Revolution Podcast. I have some really exciting giveaways coming up for all of you listeners. So make sure you're following the podcast on Instagram. That is where you will find out about those giveaways. Thank you, Teresa, so much. It has been such a pleasure, and I hope to chat with you again soon.
Thank you, Erin. Bye, everybody.
Right. Bye-bye.
With hope as a guiding light, through darkest days we'll fight the night. With a whole lot of passion, with a whole lot of truth, Remedy Revolution is here for you.